Dad kicked me out at 16 for being gay. 20 years later, he's dying alone and wants me to forgive him. I never expected to receive that phone call. 20 years of silence, and suddenly my aunt's voice was trembling on the other end, telling me my father was in the hospital and asking for me. The same man who threw my belongings in garbage bags and told me I was no longer his daughter when I was just 16 years old. Let me take you back to that night in 2004. I was a junior in high school, finally ready to tell my parents about who I really was. I had been dating this amazing girl secretly for months, and I couldn't keep living a lie anymore. My mom was working her night shift at the factory, so it was just me and Dad at home. He was watching some sports game on our old television, drinking his usual beer, when I gathered every ounce of courage I had. The words came out shaky and uncertain, but I told him I was gay. I told him about my girlfriend, about how happy she made me, about how I couldn't pretend anymore. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Then he stood up, his face turning red, and started yelling things I still can't repeat without feeling that same crushing pain in my chest. He called me names that no parent should ever call their child, told me I was going to hell, that I was disgusting and had brought shame to our family. Within an hour, he had packed everything I owned into 3 black garbage bags and literally threw them onto the front lawn. I remember standing there in my pajamas and slippers, watching him slam the door, hearing the deadbolt click. I had nowhere to go, no money, no plan. I sat on those garbage bags for what felt like hours, crying until I couldn't cry anymore. My girlfriend's family took me in that night. They were incredible people who opened their home to a scared, heartbroken teenager without hesitation. Her mother made me hot chocolate and let me sleep in their guest room. Her father helped me enroll in a different school district so I could finish high school. They became the family I never had, showing me what unconditional love actually looked like. The next few years were a blur of trying to survive and build a life from nothing. I worked part-time jobs while finishing school, saved every penny I could, and somehow managed to get into a decent college with financial aid and scholarships. I met new people, found my chosen family, and slowly started to heal from the trauma of that night. My mother reached out a few times over the years, always begging me to come home, to forgive my father, to be the bigger person. But I couldn't. The wound was too deep, and frankly, I was thriving without them. I built an incredible life for myself. I got my degree, started my own business, bought a beautiful house, and married the most wonderful woman in the world. We adopted 2 kids who needed a home, and our life was full of love, laughter, and the kind of happiness I never thought I deserved as that broken 16-year-old sitting on garbage bags. Then came that phone call from my aunt. My father had been diagnosed with terminal cancer 6 months ago and had been too proud to tell anyone. He was alone, she said. My mother had left him years ago, tired of his anger and bitterness. My younger brother had moved across the country and barely spoke to either of them. My aunt lived states away and could only visit occasionally. He was dying alone in a hospital bed, and apparently in his final months he had been asking for me. My first instinct was to hang up. 20 years of silence. And now he wanted me? Now that he was dying and had nobody left? But something in my aunt's voice made me stay on the line. She told me he had changed, that he regretted everything, that he had been carrying the guilt of what he did to me for 2 decades. She said he understood if I couldn't forgive him, but he needed me to know how sorry he was. I didn't make any promises. I told her I would think about it and hung up. For days, I couldn't focus on anything. My wife was incredibly supportive, listening to me work through my feelings without trying to push me in any direction. My kids, now teenagers themselves, were confused about why I was so upset about a grandfather they had never met. How do you explain to your children that their grandfather threw their mother away like garbage for being exactly who she was meant to be? Date 1. After a week of sleepless nights and endless internal debates, I decided to go see him. Not to forgive him, not to have some magical reconciliation, but because I needed closure. I needed to look him in the eye and see for myself what 20 years had done to the man who destroyed my teenage world. The hospital was a 40-minute drive from my house. I remember my hands shaking as I parked the car, wondering if I was making a huge mistake. I almost turned around 3 times before I finally made it to his room. When I walked in, I barely recognized the man lying in that bed. The father I remembered was strong, intimidating, larger than life in his anger. This man was frail, gray, and looked so much smaller than I remembered. He looked up when I entered, and I saw something I had never seen before in his eyes. Genuine remorse. He started crying immediately, which caught me completely off guard. This was the man who had taught me that showing emotion was weakness, who had never shed a tear in front of me my entire childhood. He kept saying he was sorry, over and over, but I couldn't respond. I just stood there, watching the stranger who used to be my father fall apart. We talked for about an hour that first visit. He told me about his life since I left, how empty it had been, how he had pushed everyone away with his anger and stubbornness. He said he had been wrong about everything, that he had let his fear and ignorance destroy the most important relationship in his life. He asked about my life, and I found myself sharing more than I had planned to. I told him about my wife, my kids, my business, my house. His eyes lit up when I talked about my family, and he said he was proud of me, that I had become everything he had hoped I would be despite his failures as a father. But here's the thing that really messed with my head. He pulled out a worn envelope from his bedside table. Inside were dozens of newspaper clippings, printed articles, and photos. He had been following my life from a distance for 20 years. Every time my business was mentioned in the local paper, every community award I had received, every photo from my wedding that had been shared publicly by friends on social media, he had somehow found and saved all of it. He had created this secret shrine to my life, tracking my successes and milestones while never reaching out. It was simultaneously the most touching and most infuriating thing I had ever experienced. He had been proud of me all along, had been watching me build the life he had tried to destroy, but had been too proud or too scared to reach out. 20 years of missed birthdays, holidays, achievements, and heartbreaks because he couldn't swallow his pride and admit he was wrong. I left that day feeling more confused than when I arrived. Part of me was still that hurt 16-year-old who wanted him to suffer the way he had made me suffer. But another part of me, the part that had been loved and healed by my chosen family, felt something resembling pity for this broken man who had wasted 2 decades being miserable. Update 2. I started visiting him regularly, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. Each visit revealed more layers to this complicated situation. He told me stories about his own childhood that I had never heard before. His father had been abusive, both physically and emotionally. He had grown up in a household where love was conditional, where being different was met with violence, where emotions were seen as weaknesses to be beaten out of you. This didn't excuse what he had done to me, but it helped me understand where his fear and anger had come from. He had been raised by wolves and had somehow managed to be slightly less of a wolf than his own father, though that bar was pretty low. He told me about the night I came out to him, how his first instinct had been to hug me, but then his father's voice had echoed in his head, telling him what real men do when faced with disappointment. He also told me something that completely blindsided me. 3 days after he kicked me out, he had driven to my girlfriend's house to bring me home. He had realized he had made a terrible mistake, that losing me was worse than whatever shame he thought I had brought to the family. But when he got there and saw me through the window, laughing with my girlfriend's family, looking happier than he had seen me in years, he couldn't bring himself to knock on the door. He said he sat in his car for 2 hours, watching me be part of a family that accepted me unconditionally, and realized that bringing me back to his house of anger and conditional love would be selfish. He thought I was better off without him, so he drove away and never came back. For 20 years, he had convinced himself that staying away was the most loving thing he could do for me. But here's where the story takes another unexpected turn. During one of our conversations, he mentioned that he had something important to tell me about my mother. I had always assumed she had been devastated when he kicked me out, that she had been fighting for me behind the scenes. The truth was much more complicated. My mother had known I was gay for months before I came out. She had read my diary, gone through my phone, and had been planning to send me to one of those conversion programs. When I came out to my father that night, she wasn't at work like I thought. She was at her sister's house, planning my intervention. My father kicking me out had actually saved me from something potentially much worse. This revelation changed everything I thought I knew about my childhood. My mother, who I had always seen as the victim of my father's anger, had been planning to put me through psychological torture to try to change who I was. My father, in his misguided rage, had accidentally protected me from that fate. The conversations with my father became deeper and more frequent. He wanted to know everything about my life, and I found myself wanting to share it with him. I showed him pictures of my wedding, videos of my kids' school performances, stories about my business successes and failures. He listened to everything with the attention of someone trying to memorize every detail. He also started talking about practical things. He had been saving money for years, money he wanted to leave to me and my children. He had never remarried, never had other children, and had lived modestly while working and saving. He wanted to make sure my kids could go to college, that my wife and I could retire comfortably, that somehow his money could make up for all the years of support he had failed to provide. But the most surprising thing he did was ask to meet my family. He said he understood if I said no, that he had no right to ask, but he wanted to see the people who had made me happy. He wanted to apologize to my wife for taking her mother-in-law away from her, to tell my children that their grandfather had been a fool, to somehow try to repair the damage he had done to our extended family. Final update. I talked to my wife about his request to meet our family. She had been incredibly supportive throughout this entire process, never pushing me to forgive or forget, just encouraging me to do whatever felt right for my healing. She said she was willing to meet him if I thought it would help, but that our children's emotional safety was her priority. We decided to bring the kids to meet him. I was terrified about how it would go, but I also realized that this might be the only chance they would ever have to meet their grandfather. We prepared them as best we could, explaining that he had made serious mistakes when I was young, but that he was trying to make things right before he died. The meeting was both heartbreaking and beautiful. He cried when he saw my wife, thanking her for loving me when he had failed to. He told her she was beautiful and that he could see why I had chosen her as my partner. He asked her about her family, her interests, her dreams, treating her with a respect and kindness I had never seen him show any woman during my childhood. But it was his interaction with my children that really broke my heart. He was gentle and curious, asking them about school, their friends, their hobbies. My youngest, who was 14 at the time, asked him directly why he had been mean to me when I was her age. He looked her in the eye and told her that he had been scared and angry, that he had been taught wrong things about love and family, and that throwing me away had been the biggest mistake of his life. My oldest, who was 16, the same age I had been when he kicked me out, asked him what he would do differently if he could go back. He said he would have hugged me, told me he loved me no matter what, and spent every day since then trying to be worthy of being my father. He said he would have walked me down the aisle at my wedding, spoiled my children, and been the grandfather they deserved. After that visit, we started bringing the kids to see him regularly. He had about 2 months left, and we spent that time building something that resembled a family relationship. He taught my youngest how to play chess, something I had never learned because we had never had that kind of relationship. He helped my oldest with a school project about family history, sharing stories about our ancestors that I had never heard. During our last conversation, he told me he understood if I couldn't forgive him completely, but that knowing I had let him be part of my life at the end meant everything to him. He said he had wasted 20 years being too proud to reach out, but that these final months of knowing my family had been the happiest of his life. He passed away on a Tuesday morning in March. I was holding his hand when it happened, something I never thought I would do. My aunt had called me at work to say the doctors thought it would be that day, and I dropped everything to be there. His last words to me were that he loved me and that he was proud of the woman I had become. Here's what I didn't expect. His death hit me harder than I thought it would. Not just because of the man he had been at the end, but because of the grief for the relationship we could have had all along. I mourned the father I never got to have, the grandfather my children barely got to know, the 20 years of family memories that were lost forever because of fear and pride. But I also felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. I had gotten to see him take accountability for his actions. I had gotten to witness him try to make amends, even though it was too late to undo the damage. I had gotten to show him that his rejection hadn't destroyed me, that I had built a beautiful life filled with love and acceptance. At his funeral, I was surprised by how many people came. Co-workers, neighbors, people from his church. Apparently, in his later years, he had become someone who helped others. His pastor told me that my father had talked about me constantly, that he had become an advocate for parents of LGBTQ children in their community. He had used his own story as a cautionary tale, helping other families avoid making the same mistakes he had made. The most shocking thing was a letter he had written to me that his lawyer gave me after the funeral. In it, he had detailed every regret he had about our relationship, every moment he had wanted to reach out but hadn't, every achievement of mine he had celebrated from afar. He had written about watching me graduate college through social media posts, about crying with pride when he saw my wedding photos, about wishing he could have been there for every milestone. But the letter also contained something else. A trust fund he had set up for my children's education, a life insurance policy with me as the beneficiary, and the deed to his house, which he had been maintaining perfectly for years in hopes that someday I might want it. He had spent 20 years not just watching my life from a distance, but planning ways to support my family even after he was gone. The house was the biggest surprise. When I went to clean it out, I found a room I had never seen before. It was filled with everything related to me and my family. Photos printed from social media, newspaper clippings, school programs from my children's events that he had somehow obtained, birthday cards he had bought but never sent, Christmas presents he had wrapped but never delivered. 20 years of loving me from a distance, of being proud of me while being too ashamed to reach out. I'm still processing all of this. I don't know if what I feel is forgiveness or just acceptance. I don't know if his efforts at the end were enough to make up for 20 years of abandonment. But I do know that I'm glad I didn't let pride or anger keep me from those final months with him. I'm glad my children got to meet their grandfather, even briefly. I'm glad I got to see him try to make things right, even if it was too late for us to have the relationship I had always wanted. The most important thing I learned from this experience is that people can change, even when it seems impossible. My father was a broken man who had been raised by broken people, and he had passed that brokenness on to me. But somehow, through love and acceptance from my chosen family, I had managed to break that cycle. And somehow, in his final years, he had managed to break it too. I think about that scared 16-year-old girl sitting on garbage bags sometimes, and I wish I could tell her that everything was going to be okay, that she would build a life more beautiful than anything she could imagine, that she would be loved unconditionally, that she would become the parent she never had. I wish I could tell her that even her father would eventually see the light, even if it took him 20 years to find it. Would I change what happened? Would I want those 20 years back? I honestly don't know. The pain of his rejection shaped me into someone who fights for acceptance and love. It made me determined to create the family I never had. It taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about choice, commitment, and unconditional love. But I also know that my children will never know what it feels like to be rejected by a parent. They will never doubt their worth or wonder if love is conditional. They will never have to choose between being authentic and being accepted. And maybe that's enough. Maybe breaking the cycle of rejection and fear is the most important thing I could do with my life. My father died alone in many ways, but he also died knowing that his daughter had forgiven him enough to let him be part of her life at the end. He died knowing that his grandchildren would remember him as someone who loved them, even if he hadn't been there for most of their lives. He died knowing that his mistakes hadn't destroyed me, that I had become everything he had hoped I would be. And me? I'm still here, still building my beautiful life with my beautiful family. I'm still that girl who came out at 16, but now I'm also a woman who learned that love can exist even in the aftermath of rejection, that healing can happen even when it seems impossible, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is let someone try to make things right, even when it's too late to fix everything. The money he left us will help my children go to college. The house will be sold, and we'll use the money to take family trips and make memories. But the most valuable thing he left me was proof that even the most broken relationships can find moments of grace, even when those moments come at the very end.